You are listening to the Atlanta Sports Podcast, the only podcast covering all of your teams. Bringing you the best sports news from the state of Georgia, from the professional ranks to the high school levels, we have it all. Hello everybody, welcome back to the Atlanta Sports Podcast. My name is Frankie Maloof and I am joined by Luke Winstall. Today we're going to be doing our Georgia Bulldogs Bowl preview show. They're going to be playing the TCU Horned Frogs tomorrow in Memphis for the AutoZone Liberty Bowl. And we're going to get you ready for that one here. And Luke, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Frankie. It's nice to be on to talk a little bit about Georgia. They've got a really interesting bowl game coming up. A nice matchup. I like to see it because Georgia and TCU do not get to play very often. So it's going to be an interesting game. We'll start off with Georgia. They're on a 20-year bowl streak. It's the longest active streak in the SEC. And TCU comes in on just a 3-year streak. They missed the bowl game in 2013, but played Ole Miss in 2014. And Oregon, they took them to 3 overtimes last year in the Alamo Bowl. So they've had some pretty interesting, exciting bowl games, and now this will be their 3rd straight. TCU all-time is 15-15-1 in bowl games, so right on 500 there. But, both teams have a pretty storied history with Georgia, bringing in a new coach, TCU, having a good coach in Gary Patterson, who's done a nice job with TCU. They've been in the national conversation the past few years, so again, going to be a really nice matchup.
Right, and this matchup is interesting to most Georgia fans now because Georgia's been playing Big Ten teams recently. They had Nebraska a few years, 2 or 3 times in the past few years, so it's nice that they have a Big 12 team for a change.
Yeah, with Georgia, again, playing TCU, it's going to be a nice game. What you were saying about a Big 12 opponent, again, like I said, a matchup that you don't get to see very often. I'm very excited about it, even though TCU is a 6-6 team. They have a good chance to compete with Georgia and give us a nice game.
All right, so Georgia, they started off the season, they did beat North Carolina. We were both there. That was a great game. It was a good way to start off the Kirby Smart era, and most Georgia fans thought that it was going to be a huge upswing for the team. But the season kind of fell off a little bit later. They did end up beating Nicholls State. That was a scare. And then they beat Missouri, another scare. And then they ended up getting blown out by Ole Miss. But, the season just went downhill from there. They lost to Tennessee on that heartbreaker. And then they did rebound to beat South Carolina, but then they lost to Vanderbilt again. And then they lost to Florida, and by then the season's really coming unraveled. Then they beat Kentucky, Auburn, which was a signature win of the season, and Louisiana Lafayette. Then they came back and lost to Georgia Tech at home. Another heartbreaker. So the season for Georgia not quite what it was expected to be. A lot of Georgia fans thought they had a chance to win the SEC East, and they did. Beating Tennessee would have helped. I think beating Vanderbilt would have helped.
Yeah, with Georgia, the way I think about it, if you don't have those 3 just close game losses, that's what the team has to work on, is winning those close games, because if you do that, you're in a much different bowl scenario. We're probably talking about a lot different of a bowl. The team is not in Memphis. They're somewhere bigger and better. If you beat Georgia Tech and Vanderbilt, those 2 1-point losses, if you split those games out at the end and win, then they're a 9-win team. If they were to prevent or bat down that Hail Mary against Tennessee, it's a 10-win team. They're very close to that. The team has the talent to be a 10-win team. We've seen it in years past. And they were pretty good, gave it a nice run, but unfortunately couldn't stick out the close games. The only games that were really out of reach for Georgia this year, Ole Miss and Florida, so I don't really worry about those. The team has a lot of improving to do. Kirby Smart is still assembling not just talent, but the right talent to run his offensive and defensive systems. So I think you give them a few years there. But, again, Georgia, if they could just stick out those close games, would have been a much different season and a much different post-season as well with the bowl game.
Right, and you're looking at maybe the Sugar Bowl, if they were to beat Tech and Vanderbilt, because then at that point they'd be 9-3, then hold on to the Hail Mary versus Tennessee, that's 10-2, and Auburn's in the Sugar Bowl right now at 8-4, and Georgia has head-to-head against Auburn, so at this point you're looking at possibly the Sugar Bowl against Oklahoma, which would be another interesting matchup against the Big 12 team.
Yeah, another Big 12 team. I like playing the Big 12 just because I don't generally get to watch those Big 12 games myself. I'm usually watching a lot of SEC and some ACC, and this year it's been a lot of Big 10. But Big 12 I don't get to watch a lot, but the teams are still very good, intriguing, kind of fun to watch as well. So I like to watch, our SEC teams play against them, but Georgia versus Oklahoma, that would be definitely a fun game to watch. I think Georgia would be a pretty heavy underdog, but you never know.
All right, so we're going to get into this matchup, Georgia versus TCU. TCU's offense is 58th in points scored. They score 31.7 points per game, rolling up 475 yards per game, which is not bad. Georgia, on the other hand, they're 108th offensively out of 128 total Division I FBS teams. They only score 24 points per game, and they only rack up 382 yards per game. So that's the weak spot of this Georgia team. It is their offense. It hasn't been a secret this entire year. New offensive coordinator, new quarterback, freshman quarterback at that. So that'd be the one weak spot for Georgia that's kind of hindered him this entire season.
Yeah, when I think about it, I don't think of the coach and the quarterback. I actually think of, the opposite side. I think of the offensive line. They've been, I don't think it's even nice to call them a good offensive line. At times they've been terrible. They've just had a rough time putting up with certain teams and certain linemen. And they've improved. Coach Pittman is a great offensive line coach. He's just really good at what he does, and he's seen that improvement, but they just didn't have the talent to start out. I think they were playing a guard at the tackle spot, and they were playing a Rhode Island transfer and Tyler Catalina at the other tackle. And that's definitely not ideal. But now with the recruits Georgia's bringing in, I don't think that's going to be a problem in the years to come. But it was a problem in the year 2016. And you could see that it translates. The running game was not as good. Nick Chubb had a rough time because a lot of times defenders were already in the backfield by the time he was handed the ball. And Sony Michel didn't have a great chance to succeed either. So now I think that offensive line is probably the reason the offense is a 108 out of 128 overall.
Yeah, and I got to give Kirby Smart a little bit of a break. These aren't his players yet. He did have one recruiting class and not even a full year to recruit those players. He was recruiting some of those guys over to Alabama before he switched over to recruit them to Georgia. So, like you said, the offensive line shouldn't be too much of a problem in the future as Coach Pittman and Coach Smart put their classes together coming up this signing day and then in the signing days in the future. But this year it was a problem. Now, the rushing game should have been really good. Should have been exceptional because you have two of the best backs in the country, Nick Chubb and Sony Michel. But the fact that they weren't able to get going put more pressure on a freshman quarterback. And that's not always the formula for success. He did a good job most of the time. There are still a few mistakes that he made, reading coverages and calling plays in the huddle, but those will get ironed out as he gets older and gains more experience. And then defensively, TCU, they have the 60th best defense in the country. They allow 27 points per game, and they allow over 400 yards per game. So Georgia has an opportunity here to put up some pretty big offensive numbers if they were able to get going. And then the Georgia defense, 40th defensively, 24 points per game, only allowing 328 yards per game. And the defense has been the strong point for Georgia this year.
Yeah, defense has definitely been the strong point. It's about 68 ranks nationally higher than that offense. But with Georgia, they're still, like we were talking about in our old-fashioned hate preview, they score as many points as they allow. 24 points per game scored, 24 allowed. Defense does a nice job. I like watching that defense. The backs are pretty good. The linebackers, I think, is they keep developing and growing, and Kirby Smart keeps teaching. I think they have a chance to be one of the best linebacking groups in the country. I think, again, the line has to improve on the defensive side of the ball. Maybe a little bit better pass rushing. Run stopping wasn't too bad, but overall the defense has been pretty good. I've enjoyed watching them, especially a lot more than the offense. And the defense has been what has kept Georgia in the game so far. And on the TCU side, with them, like you said, the 60th best defense, they're a spot that Georgia's going to have to attack here. If Georgia on offense, even though their numbers aren't great, if they can get Nick Chubb and Sony Michel out there, really running the ball and commit to the run and start out like that, I think they'll have a good chance to get on this TCU defense, considering they haven't been too good in that Big 12 that they play in.
And last time Nick Chubb was in a bowl game was 2 years ago versus Louisville in the Belk Bowl. He rushed for 266 yards, which he had a breakout day. That was his season high, and I think it's still his career high. So if he could get going again and even come close to that, maybe 150 or 200 yards, that would prove to be a good sign for Georgia. And then Sonny Michel, if you add him on there, he's another just great back that you can hand the ball off, give Nick Chubb some rest, and take some pressure off of that freshman quarterback. All right, so Luke, what's the key to the game for Georgia?
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on it just there. Stop that TCU offense. Their defense is not great. Georgia will have their plays against that TCU defense, but if our defense can stop that TCU offense, then Georgia will be fine. They'll be able to control the pace on offense if TCU doesn't have the ball. And with the Horned Frogs, I mean, their offense is good, not great, and Georgia has a good chance with a good defense to make some plays and get out and stop them. And if that were to happen, Georgia would most likely get the win.
Yeah, I agree there, because Georgia, like you said, they're going to get their chances to score. If this turns out to be a shootout, like we talked about before the Georgia Tech game, if this is a shootout, Georgia's going to lose. They can't keep up with TCU's offense if TCU can get going. The key to this will be putting the defense and bringing pressure and pushing Kenny Hill, who is still on the injury report. He's listed as probable. He has a foot injury. If Georgia can get him going backwards and put some pressure on him, then he's going to make mistakes, and that's what Georgia's going to need to get to capitalize on him and have short field positions for the offense so they can put some points on the board.
Yeah, now the key for Georgia, we said, is stopping the TCU offense. Do you think Georgia right now can hold that Horned Frog offense?
Well, Georgia's defense has been good. I think they do have a great shot at doing that. But inside linebacker Natrez Patrick, he hasn't been practicing, but he will play. That's according to some reports we've gotten today. I do think that that'll make a big difference because he is such a playmaker defensively in his linebacker position. That would leave a huge hole in the middle of the field for Georgia. Reggie Carter is also a game-time decision, so there's a little bit of uncertainty at the linebacker spot right now. I do think that if both of those guys will play, Georgia will have a much easier time of it. Then also Tyreek McGee, he's a freshman backup cornerback. He's hurt as well. And then the guys ahead of him, Rico McGraw and Jawan Briscoe, they are transferring because Georgia is coming really close to that scholarship limit with their incoming recruiting class. And those guys don't want to just risk the opportunity of their scholarships getting pulled in exchange for better players. Also, both of those guys will not play Friday as well, which leaves more defensive holes for Georgia. But all in all, I think Georgia's got enough pieces there to hold on to the TCU offense and keep them out of the end zone.
Yeah, Georgia has enough. The defense overall has been good, like we said. The only problem may be depth here. As you see the game wear on in the third quarter, the second half, especially towards the end of that fourth quarter, if the game's tight and the defensive starters or the rotation, the number one guys are having to play a whole lot, there's going to be maybe a little bit of a depth issue with guys getting tired and things like that. So that may be something to watch out for with all these injuries. And, of course, like you said, the transfers are not going to play on Friday. So you might have to watch out for that. But overall, I think Georgia has a good chance to hold TCU. But, again, depth may be a problem in the second half of the game.
Yep, that would be the issue for Georgia. I think they're going to be okay. The only thing is, even if they were to stop TCU and hold them under 20 points, will Georgia be able to function enough to score against TCU?
Yeah, I think Georgia, they have the potential here. Again, Riley Ridley, a guy we were talking about, he's got an ankle injury. He has a ligament damage in his ankle. He's been on crutches. So he will not be playing in the game. So that's a hit to the wide receiver group. But you still have Isaiah McKenzie and Terry Godwin, who had a good performance last year in the Tax Player Bowl. He actually, I think, won the MVP of that game. You have those two guys in there at receiver, but depth at the wide receiver position takes a little bit of a hit, so that's maybe a concern. But again, I was talking about it. Georgia, I think, will commit to the run. They'll be able to control the game with their two stud running backs, and that will open up the passing game, make things easier on Jacob Eason. And TCU might leave them kind of stuck if they're not able to stop the run or the pass. And Georgia, their offense can turn it into a shootout if that's how it has to be. But like you said, Georgia may not win that shootout because TCU has a better offense, I think, overall than Georgia.
And I think that another key to this game is Georgia needs to be able to slow it down. You got to be able to pound the rock, not take shots downfield. You want to do that at some point, but Georgia needs to be able to slow this down. That way the score doesn't get to where it's 35-31 or something. You got to keep it lower than that if you're Georgia. And that's why you got to use Nick Chubb. He has 988 yards on the season. He's probably going to get his 1,000 yards rushing. Sonny Michel, probably not. He's at 753 this year. But he does have a better average at 5.5. So both of those guys are very potent weapons if they're used correctly. And you got to get the run game going. The offensive line has got to be able to hold their blocks just long enough. Both of those guys are pretty fast. So if Georgia can get them through the line, I think that this will be a good day for the Dogs.
Yeah, with Sony, I think that rushing number is a little bit misleading just because he missed a few games at the start of the season to an arm injury. Remember his arm being in a cast. So I think if Sony had been able to play, he would be right up there with Nick Chubb, and you'd see Georgia either on the verge of having a couple 1,000-yard rushers or with Sony over 1,000 and Nick just right there behind him. I think you'd see something like that. With Chubb, I don't think he's been at full strength all season, and he's just been getting slowly better and better. I think that's part of the reason that he has decided to return to Georgia. And also, with Sony, I think it can only help his draft stock to come back to Georgia. And this is where they start, is with the bowl game. They don't have the scouts looking at him as much as they would if they were declaring for the draft. But I think it's where you start to build momentum, and both of them came off injuries, and they've been getting better and better. I think now with a couple weeks rest, they have a chance to really break out and have a good game.
All right, so before we finish up, we're going to go through the injury report, just mention everything we haven't so far. For TCU, Kenny Hill, he's probable. He has a foot injury we mentioned earlier. On the season, he has 251 for 413. He's thrown for over 3,000 yards, 15 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions. Now, those 13 interceptions is going to be where Georgia needs to capitalize. If Georgia can't force turnovers, this is going to be a long day. But I do think Georgia will be able to because, first of all, he's not going to be 100%, I don't believe. And second of all, because Georgia's defense is not bad at all. They're a good defense, and I think they're going to be able to do it. Dominic Sanders back in the secondary. They'll be able to pick some passes off, and that's going to be huge for Georgia in order to build momentum and carry that ball over the goal line to score some points. And then also, these are some old injuries. Bryson Henderson and Montrell Wilson and Sean Nixon are all going to be out for this game. They were all out for the season. Two of them with undisclosed injuries, and then Montrell Wilson with a leg injury. And then for Georgia, Jason Stanley, he's upgraded to probable for Friday's game. Michael Chigbu is doubtful. Jawan Briscoe is going to miss because, along with Rico McGraw, because they are transferring. Kirby Choate is also doubtful Friday. Tyreek McGee is questionable versus TCU with a leg injury. Riley Ridley, we talked about him. He's going to be out more than likely. Natrez Patrick, and he will be questionable, but I do expect him to play. That's what we talked about earlier. He will be a big key for Georgia. And then Marshall Long, the punter, is out for the season with that knee injury, so Bryce Ramsey will be handling the punting duties. And Luke, before we go, you got any predictions for tomorrow?
Yeah, my prediction is going to be a Georgia win 28-24. I think they're going to be able to score enough on offense. I think the first quarter is going to be slow, and they're going to score a touchdown in the second quarter, 2 touchdowns in the third, and 1 in the fourth quarter. That's my very detailed prediction for the game. I think Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel will combine for over 225 yards, and Terry Godwin will have a touchdown.
Well, that is detailed. I wasn't going to go that far, but I would say Georgia. I do think they're going to win. I will say 27-21. I think that'll be a good point. They'll probably kick a couple field goals. I think Georgia will be able to hold them. But like I said, if this game does get over 30, 35 points, I think TCU is going to take care of it because Georgia can't keep up offensively at this point. And that brings us to the end of our show today. Thank you again for listening to the Atlanta Sports Podcast. Thank you for finding us, whether it be on our website, atlantasportspodcast.com, or on Twitter, where you can find us at ATL Sportscast. You can also find us on most of the major directories, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio. We'd like to ask that you leave us a review and subscribe to us there. That would mean a lot to us. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. And we hope to see you next week with another show.